to kick us off.
Welcome, everyone, to the Activist San Diego community meeting. Thank you for taking your time to be here with us and listen to us on a brief historical outline of the man we call Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's done a lot for the American society. Some people think because he is an African American that he did all this work for African people of African descent, for Black people. But every person that comes to this nation are standing on the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. Whether you are from Europe or whether you're from Asia, whether you're from Africa, South and Central America, those changes that include all of us, no matter what our background is, no matter what our religion is, that we can all participate to a better degree in his time in the this place called the United States of America. And it was not an easy task. This country was built on racism. We have to acknowledge and realize that this is the fabric of this nation. And racism had to go out, and it still needs to go out. But at that time, it had to be forced out. It had to go kicking and screaming just to get laws made to prevent racism and bigotry in our country. So we're going to talk about this man who made huge strides in this regard, and we're going to start in at his birth. You know, we just did the march on for his birthday yesterday. And his actual birthday is the 15th of January, but we try to do it the close weekend next to his birthday so everybody can be able to attend and participate. So here we are on the day after that March, which is the 20th of January, 2026. And we want to talk about, we're going to go back and reflect on when he was born in 1929. He was born in 1929, and I want to talk about his father first before I talk about his birth. I like to talk about my father. My father, for people who spend enough time with me, my father is a involved father. He was an involved Black man. He was a powerful pro-Black man, as well as my mother was a pro-Black powerful woman. And we should start with the generations before so we can really understand what's going on. So I want to introduce you all to a man. His name is Michael King Sr. And he was a Baptist preacher. He was a civil rights activist, and he was a person that took no stuff. So when he was in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was pastoring a church, he was also talking about liberation, about freedom, about the rights of Black people. So when people come with the idea that the church is something that causes you to lay down and sit down and wait for the hereafter, this is a fallacy that people have put on people of faith. There are many from the slave revolts in the early years of these colonies, all the way up to today, where we find solace in the church, we find backing in the church. Now, churches make their wrong mistakes, of course, churches do these mistakes, but you have to be able to see what has happened when it comes in terms of Martin Luther King, who we're talking about today. So his father, a powerful Black preacher who spoke out against injustice, spoke out for civil rights, and he was really challenged and threatened at the time. When we're talking Martin Luther King Jr. was born, it's in 1929. So we're not even talking about the strides and people coming together and changing laws that would make that kind of speech free. So he risked his life, and this is some of the pattern that we see Dr. King is raised on. So in 1934, something interesting, very interesting happens. His father takes a trip to Germany, and being that he's a pastor and a Baptist, it was a Baptist conference. They went to Germany, and what did they do? They went to Germany to learn about a man called Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a Protestant, and he started Protestantism, and they went to go learn about him because they're of the Protestant faith. They are Baptists, and you have Catholic faith, you have the Protestant faith, both under the Christian umbrella, but you have Catholics and you have Protestants. So they went to visit Germany, where this German monk was from, and he protested or against the Catholic Church, which where we get the term Protestants from. So they went to learn about this man. His name is Martin Luther. Michael King Sr. was so impressed with what he learned about the movement of Protestantism that Michael King Sr. changed his name. to Martin Luther King Sr. And then he named his already born son, who was 5 years old, he renamed him from Martin King Jr. to Martin Luther King Jr. This is how we get Martin Luther King Jr. on the scene. At 5 years old, he becomes Martin Luther King, named after the German monk of Protestantism in Germany when his father was moved to go there. So I guess by that age, by the time he started school, I guess he was always Martin Luther King at school. But I think this is an interesting note that some people don't know, and it's not one of those important facts you need to know. But I think it's a great trivia question that Dr. Martin Luther King, his name was Michael at birth, Michael King Jr. So uh, he was an astute, very astute student. He was very smart. As a matter of fact, as I said to a elementary school where I was invited to speak about Dr. King last week, that I challenged all the students find out when he graduated from high school. I wanted them to do well in school, not to take this cultural person as a nerd for doing really well in school and look at it as a negative. He graduated from high school at the age of 15, and he was accepted into Morehouse College, a historically black college, at the age of 15. So he's a college student at the age of 15. And I was joking with the elementary students. I was like, "Hey, you're 16, aren't you? You're 16." And they all laughed. They're like, "No, I'm 10 or whatever." Their age were at the time. So he took education seriously. And this idea that people are nerds because they're smart, the idea that if they are studious, that they are quote unquote acting white. I don't know where that came from. When people were in my hometown, they didn't say being smart was acting white. They just said that it was nerdish. But Dr. King was a very intelligent man. Malcolm X was an intelligent man. Frederick Douglass was an intelligent man. All of these people were intelligent people. Sojourner Truth was an intelligent woman. Rosa Parks was an intelligent woman. We have a lot of intelligent people, and it has nothing to do with whether you are a nerd or whatever. So I advise all of us to teach our children that when they are being educated and they're being smart, they're in the path of the greats: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, Sojourner Truth, these kinds of great historical figures. And there are many, many more. And I don't want to have to go through all of them. They could be like the women, our sisters, that the movie Hidden Figures comes out. Those women, we could say that they were nerds if you want, but I would reject that and say that they were intelligent women who made a great impact on NASA. And Martin Luther King was one of those people who really took education seriously, and he thought deeply on these kind of issues. And here he is in the historically black college, Morehouse, and he graduates by the time he's 19. And then from 19, he's accepted into a theological school at Crozier Theological Seminary. Now, this is just a little brag for myself. Crozier Theological Seminary is in my hometown. I have nothing to do with it. I didn't go there or anything like that. But I have to recognize that in Chester, Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised, Martin Luther King lived his life in Chester, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, while he was in theological school, theological seminary, Crozier Theological Seminary. So as he's becoming this Baptist preacher, he's following in his father's footsteps. The church in one of the churches in my city hosted him so he could practice. All the black seminarians, they would go there and practice their sermons and things like that. And the pastor of that church was Dr. King's father's best friend, one of his best friends. So he said, "Look out for my son while he's in Pennsylvania." Celebrate our birthdays, and I'm not complaining about that. But people celebrate their birthdays all week long. All week long. Some people all month long they celebrate their birthday. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, what did you do to get a whole birthday for a whole week? And we couldn't even get one day for Dr. Martin Luther King back when I was coming out of high school. They were discussing in 1986, they were discussing whether Martin Luther King should have a birthday. I graduated in 1987 and I went into the military right away. I became a combat medic. I wasn't one of those runner and gunners. I was a combat medic to save lives. And when I went into boot camp in that medical school, medical training, they they were still arguing the fact then that Martin Luther King didn't deserve a day. So we have the idea that the country approved of Dr. King. It did not. More than half of the nation, when he was doing his work, did not agree with Dr. King. And some people say, well, they just didn't like the marching and the sit ins and the riots that it was caused. They didn't cause the riots. The riots were put on them. And you find that we've come no further. We think we're post racial America, or we're more in the light of Dr. King. It The same feelings on conservative values about Dr. King you'll hear today. You'll hear people talking about they can't wait till next year. Next year is 2027, and there's supposed to be some reports to come out about Dr. King. Let me tell you, they reports that they claim that are coming out and have been coming out little by little, all of them, most of them are anonymous. The attack of the COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, which attacked Dr. King, attacked Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, all power to the people, Black Panther Party. I'm the field marshal of the San Diego chapter of the Black Panther Party, and they did this from the federal level, from the FBI. So if you hear this ringing going around, Martin Luther King wasn't a good guy, he wasn't doing this and doing that. This was all to disgrace him so that he could stop doing the positive work he's done. So a lot of us probably on this channel here that are listening, you've probably done some really good work, and then in that work, you see people try to tear you down. They try to put out falsehoods about you, and that falsehood is because you're doing such a good job. People don't waste their time on those who do nothing. They don't waste their time. And the greater the attack on you when you're doing good work, the greater the work is that you're doing. So don't lose hope, don't lose steam, and neither did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So he graduates from theological school. He graduates with his PhD at age 25, and right in that time, we start having the bus boycotts in Montgomery. Rosa Parks is arrested in 1955. And this is when he's thrusted on stage. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was kind of a shy guy. He wasn't the Martin Luther King that most people think of, being able to articulate loudly in front of huge quarter of a million audience and stuff like that. He was a reluctant leader. He wanted to help, of course, because he learned it from his father, but he didn't want to be in front. He didn't want that. But people, because of his talent, because of his articulation, they wanted to allow him to go out front and use his talents for the betterment of people of African descent and for the nation. So it's just that the tip of the spear, so to speak, is the edge against people of African descent, the particular hatred that this country had at the time for, and some still do, of course, as we see in the pollings of about people, laws that impact people of color. So he did go to the front. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to be arrested in the 20th century, in 1955. But even as far back as in 1855, there was bus boycotts here in California, and we had women who stood up on the buses here in California. That was the first boycott here, and in Pennsylvania. There were bus boycotts because they wouldn't allow Black people to ride the bus in the 1860s. In the 1850s, as a matter of fact, the 1850s. And we had in Northern California, we had women who would not get off the bus. They were arrested, they were fined, and they took it to court, and they won. They won their case. So 100 years later, we're still dealing with the same issues. What are these issues that Dr. King is working on? The issue is, after the Civil War, and please keep this in mind when you talk about the civil rights movement. After the Civil War, we had what's called Reconstruction. Reconstruction was an era that gave Black people more political rights. It gave them the franchise. You've heard of disenfranchisement. It comes from this. The franchise is the right to vote. The right to vote gives you your ability to persuade lawmakers to do what you think is best for your community. It's self-determination. So when African males first got the right to vote, it really made changes. A lot of black people in office, a lot of black people working on school programs. They worked on food insecurity, healthcare. All of these things came out of Reconstruction movement, and it was by liberals, by liberals. So what happens is the Reconstruction era is killed, and they have what's called the redemption era comes after that to remove black people from politics, to remove black people from all of these franchise and everything that they have. And this is why Dr. King had to rework on it, not because it was new. Dr. King was marching and sit-ins for the country for 100 years to implement the laws that were already on the books, just implement them. So we had to have acts that forced the government to implement something that was already achieved by blood, sweat, and tears from African people of African descent and others in this country in the Reconstruction. So we see it takes 100 years just to make civil rights movement. So we look at the Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s. If you look it up, in 1866 there was a Civil Rights Act. In 1866. So I just want to do that callback so you can actually know where we are. And then I want us to think after I'm finished, get to my conclusion, think from what I'm talking about in 1960s and where might we be in 2060s. I don't feel like there's much change from this 100 years to another 100 years. But anyway, let me get back on track with this bus boycott and boycott, BDS, boycott, sanction, divestment and sanction, BDS. It's part of our country's heritage to be able to boycott. Our colonists boycotted England. Our people of African descent boycott places that didn't hire them. So what did they do? They boycotted the bus institution because the bus companies were not allowing black people to either ride or ride in the back. If there's no room in the back, you got to wait for the next bus. So they boycotted because when you hit a person's pocket, it's a capitalistic society. When you hit their pockets in their bank accounts, that's when you see people make moves, not because of the morality of it, not because of the equality of it, the equity of it, is because you hurt their bank account. So they used this strategy, and that strategy, it took a long time. You know, people think they said, okay, we're not going to ride the bus for a day or a week. No, it took a long time. It took months for them to ride and shuttle each other to work, to shopping, and things like that. And they shut down that system because there were a lot of black people in those counties. So when you look at the Reconstruction era, I always do a callback to Reconstruction. Some people say it's an extension of Reconstruction, our time now. Some people say it's Reconstruction 2, Reconstruction 3. But the reason why I do this is because when you look at the Reconstruction era, in the South is where most black people live. So the high number of black people, that means a high number of dollars going to companies, going to businesses, going to the bus. So when they stop using it, it really makes an impact. It's not like San Diego County, we have 5% blacks in San Diego County. And if you break it down to North County, East County, Southern County, it drops down to 2%, 2.5%. So, but that wasn't the case in places like Georgia, the Carolinas, and Mississippi, because that's where majority of black people were enslaved. So then they 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 were there in that period, and there was a great migration when they started spreading other places, but majority black people, they lived down there. So the boycott mattered. The boycott made a difference. The boycott is not hatred. Boycott is not hatred. It is a peaceful political tool. To divest is not hatred. To divest is a political persuasive tool. To sanction is not hatred. The sanction is a political persuasive tool, especially the way the grassroots use it. You know, we've had governments try to sanction other countries, and it was purely because it was a brown country versus a white country. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about grassroots movements to try to effectuate change to help the common person in our boycotts. So here we are on the Montgomery bus boycott, and it was successful because Power only understands when you attack its bank account numbers, and then they make changes for that to happen. And as we go on into the next year, 1956, the bus segregation is ruled unconstitutional. So it worked by putting pressure. So please be inspired by the Rosa Parks and the bus boycotts, that this is not a anti anyone. It is pro something. Whatever that pro is, it is pro something. So pro rights, pro justice. This is boycotts. So as we move on, this very successful. Martin Luther King is thrusted into the limelight. People are seeing Martin Luther King and his success and the words that he speaks, and he starts adding sit-ins and into restaurants that won't serve black people, and also boycotts of restaurants that won't serve people. You may have heard the statement, I will not spend my money where I cannot be hired. That's what you go to a store and there's all these white folks in a black town, but the store is all white folks and they won't hire black people, and black people needed jobs because of, again, racism. They can't get a job. They bring in white people from other counties to work these jobs, and the community is not able to work and get income for their families. So they did these sit-ins and they did these boycotts, and he founded in 1857 the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and this was a group that would go around and they would do these boycotts. They would leave from the church and they would speak about the rights of people of African descent and all Americans. They would do these marches, and this is probably when you can reminisce in your mind about it, you might come up with pictures of them sitting in at a restaurant counter and people are throwing things at them, arguing and yelling at them, pouring drinks on their head, saying, "Get out of here. You don't belong here. This is whites only." You'll see that. And you'll also see you'll go back to your mind where the hoses, the water hoses, and the dogs were sicked on people for protesting and marching and things like this. This was a strategy. Why is it strategy? At this time in the 60s, in the 50s, the world is getting smaller. What do I mean by this? Media and television is not just uh, piping in what's happening in your local town. They start piping in what's going on from state to state. And not only that, they start piping in what's going on from country to country. So in the 60s, that's the first time we could watch a war take place in real time. That was Vietnam. And that's what changed a lot of people's view on Vietnam. They saw it happening right on TV. Now, World War II, World War One, you have to get videos after the fact. But people could see it happening in real time. So here's the US, and they have the bus boycotts. They have the bus boycotts, they have the dogs on people, and only thing they're after is democracy, freedom, justice, equality, equity. This is all they're after. So that pipes around the world. And what does it do? It embarrasses the United States. The United States is considered itself sort of the policeman of the world and is going to Vietnam saying, you need democracy. You're going to Germany and Russia and all these places saying, we want democracy. We want to bring democracy to these places. The whole time they're not practicing democracy in their own country. So people started reacting. Heads of state started saying, "What are you talking about? You want democracy? You're trying to bring that democracy here?" And that's what we did. We imported democracy, but that democracy was more capitalism than it was democracy. It was a parasitic type of democracy. One example I like to bring up in this importing of democracy as capitalism, I like to bring up Cuba. And when I talk about Cuba, I'm talking about Havana. Havana was it was a playground for the United States. This is before we had Hawaii. Before we stole Hawaii from the Hawaiians, we had Havana. That was our Hawaii then. And businesses, U.S. businesses would go there, buy up a lot of tracts of land, and they would go for their holiday there to go to the hotels and the businesses and stuff like that. They said, look, if you want American business, and this is in the 1930s and 1920s and stuff like this, if you want American businesses, then you have to impose Jim Crow in another country. They said you cannot allow black people to have these services in your country in Cuba. So Cuba, Havana was segregated. People couldn't go, black people had to go through the back of the hotels. Even if they're playing in the band, a lot of those salsa bands and those kind of Latino bands, the blacks had to go through the back and they couldn't eat there. They had to eat outside. They couldn't go to the beach. It was whites only beach because some Latinos in certain parts of the world they consider themselves white because white is a privilege, and they want to associate themselves with that privilege. So it was very racist until the Cuban Revolution with Fidel Castro, and then it continued in a different form, but it was out and blatant when that happened. But they were explicit that they are importing American values, and at that time, the American values was racism. So this is what they saw when they saw the dogs in water hoses. That this is your democracy, and you're sending people to die in Vietnam. When they can't sit at a restaurant in America in the 60s, they have to die for democracy in Vietnam. They have to die for freedom in Vietnam, freedom in World War II, freedom in World War One, quote unquote. They have to die for those something that they don't enjoy in their own country. So when Dr. King speaks out about that, and we'll come to that soon, when he speaks out about militarism and the war project, it's true on the surface. But then it's true, particularly when it comes to the African American who has been very patriotic, even from the Civil War all the way up until now, have been very patriotic. I myself am a retired veteran. I served 24 years of active duty service with service in Iraq and Afghanistan. African Americans have been very patriotic, yet they were not allowed to enjoy the fruits of that patriotism, that fruits of the democracy, the equity that we were claiming we were sending around the world. So Dr. King sees this and he uses the media to pipe this around the world to expose the US hypocrisy. They never forgave him for that. They never forgave him for that. It was the whole world was seeing what was going on in the Americas. And at the same time, the whole world is seeing what's going on in South Africa, with the racism and segregation of black lands, so this is being piped all around the world, and as well what was going on in Palestine was being piped all around the world. So when we see these things happening, he used a strategy to say he would put his body and those who followed him, their bodies on the line. They would put skin in the game. They would put skin in the game to better the future of everyone else. Black, brown, Asian, white, everyone, that they would not be oppressed by the bigotry of this country, what was in its fabric. So he does go to India. He goes to India and he meets or he learns about Gandhi and his peaceful protest. Now, he was never a violent person anyway. I mean, he didn't learn nonviolence from Gandhi. People say he learned nonviolence from studying Gandhi. He did not. But he credited him for his success that he used nonviolence for. There were plenty of nonviolent other people, and I just want to say here for anybody who's a student of knowledge and they're sitting here and say, "Oh, you brought up Gandhi, and Gandhi was a racist in the beginning." He was a racist in South Africa, and it was later Gandhi, the Gandhi that we know, that is not racist and fair and just. Yes, we know this. We're just talking about the philosophy of nonviolence once he awoken. He did have to awaken. He said very horrible things about people of African descent, and that was in his 20s. In his 20s. So I'd like to take this time to pause and make another kind of public service announcement that we have to believe in redemption in some form. We can't believe that a person stays in the same condition of ignorance their whole lives. If that was the case, when Martin Luther King makes a mistake, we throw him in the garbage. Malcolm X was not the best person when he was coming up. We'd have to throw Malcolm X in the garbage, and so on and so forth. Gandhi, go in the garbage. So many people. And which one of us don't have some things that are questionable in our past, and people could probably toss us in the garbage? So redemption is a very important thing. Che Guevara He was racist in his early years, but then he turned the corner and he became more progressive, and he fought for black rights even in Africa. He went to Africa to fight for black rights. Fidel Castro sent people to Africa to fight against apartheid in South Africa. This is why Nelson Mandela, after he was freed, one of the first places he went was Cuba. The U.S. doesn't show this. You have to look it up yourself, and there's plenty on YouTube about it. He went to Cuba and thanked him for freeing South Africa and his help for freeing South Africa, because in the U.S. at the time, the U.S. was supporting South Africa. So it's just these hypocrisies come out in this way. So that was just a side note of global connections on how to see history, and I try to connect dots whenever I can when it comes to these things. So he then after he comes back, he's still working for the rights of African Americans, and he gets arrested for a sit-in. And the Kennedy that helped him was Robert Kennedy. He's the one who helped him get out of jail. Now, at the time, the president was John Kennedy, his brother, and John Kennedy was lukewarm. People like I like to use that word. A lot of people use that word. He was lukewarm on civil rights, meaning he didn't try to rock the boat. He didn't help black people so much, and he didn't harm them either. But that's not the kind of leader we needed. We needed people are getting lynched, people are getting beat up, people are getting thrown in jail. We didn't need that kind of leader. So, you know, there's some, folks that put JFK on their wall and everything, and I'm not saying take him down, but you won't find JFK on my wall in my house because he was lukewarm during this process. How warm was he? How warm was he? Well, during the same time where I'm talking about the hoses being put on black people and the dogs put on black people, that's when he first spoke out against racism. What about all the time before that when he could have done it? It was still going on. He only spoke out against it once they hit the news. Then he spoke up. He's an American. He knows what Americans do to black people. He knows that. But when it hit the news and embarrassed the country, then he makes his speech. And he did not plan to make the speech for black people with the hoses and the dogs. That wasn't his plan. You know what his plan was? His plan was to go and ask to tear down the wall in Europe for the rights of white folks. He was talking about how white folks on are all equal and brothers and stuff in this country where they had the wall, the Berlin Wall, and in his own home country, he wasn't saying much about black people. But on his way, before he got there, because he had a speech all made and ready and everything, before he got there, that's when the world started seeing the hoses and stuff. So now he has to use some of that speech for black folks. He will not be on my wall. So anyway, as we continue on, sorry for my little segues, but I like to put in little tidbits so we can understand the real gravity from the presidential seat all the way down to the governors, to the mayors, to people like this. We'll find that it was a very anti-black establishment because it's in its history, and most even civilians did not support Dr. King. Most civilians didn't. Even some black folks, because they were afraid of the backlash on black people, that they didn't support Dr. King and said, why don't you stop this? You're making it tough for us, especially people in the South. A lot of people in the South were talking about that, but there were brave people out of the South as well. So when he in 1963 he gets arrested, and he does because he's constantly getting arrested, and then he gets bailed out by some people. But we realize that in custody is not the place for Dr. King. In custody is where they kill you, and we know how that goes. I don't want to go into that. I want to stay focused on this. In custody, especially at that time, people will get arrested, and then they'll say, "Oh, they hung themselves," and you can't prove it. They didn't have to have video cameras back there. And what do you think they would do if they got wise enough and said, we got Dr. King in jail all the time. Why don't we just take care of this? So they started using a different tactic from getting arrested all the time. And it's the same tactic they used because he was a poor driver. You might not know this about Dr. King. He was a lousy driver. So he would get pulled over by law enforcement. And they said, look, Dr. King, We will chauffeur you around from now on because we can't afford you to get arrested for breaking some kind of traffic law. So this is why he got chauffeured around, not because he was a man that thought he was a king or an emperor or anything like this. He was a lousy driver. So we didn't want to go and use that and have them use that as an explanation to arrest him and possibly kill him. So while he was in jail in 1963, he pens the famous letter from Birmingham jail. He got arrested in Birmingham for his activities there. And what is this letter? Something that's really important. He got a letter from other black folks telling him to stop what he's doing. And people were saying that he is not even from some of the places like Birmingham and other these places. He's not from there. So why is he coming in causing trouble? An agitator from out of town. We hear these things all the time, when it comes to activists. They're not new. So they said, why does he say that? So whenever I'm at a city council meeting and we're protesting for the rights of the community, whether in San Diego, whether in East County, in El Cajon, or whether we're in wherever we are, Lemon Grove, wherever we may be, Escondido, Vista, Oceanside, wherever we may be at the time, you'll hear people say these are outside agitators and they don't even belong here. And Martin Luther King had the answer. Please, everyone, listen to and use this answer. This is where we get the famous quote. An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we're saying it's all of our problem, no matter where it is. So I tell people, you are the people who were talking to Dr. King in jail, and I'm going to respond to you the way he responded to them and put them on so they see what side of history they're on. So if someone is being abused in East County, it's South County's business, it's North County's business, it's everyone's business. If somebody is in El Cajon, if the mayor and the city council is allowing the oppression of our Latinx brothers and sisters in El Cajon, it's everybody's business to show up and support them there, or Vista, or wherever they are. It's all of our business because a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere, everywhere. So this is the response that he had from this famous Birmingham jail. And another thing he said, which was very important, which is in the end, the thing that you remember is not the words of your enemy, but the silence of your friends. So those people who say they stick with us and they're only with us in certain justice issues, and if there's another justice issue, especially when it involves themselves, they're not with us. They're not with us because the silence of your friends are the things that hurts the most when they claim to be on the right side of justice. And when Dr. King came here, since we're still talking about here locally, when he came here to LA and some say he even came here to San Diego, he was negatively impressed by our liberals here. And we have the same thing today, and you'll reminisce about this when you go through your lives doing work here in Southern California. He said he called us the Mississippi of the West. Dr. Martin Luther King called us the Mississippi of the West. How proud must we be about being in this area when he called us the Mississippi of the West? And he said that our liberals are are inept, basically. And please look up what he said about Southern California. That he's saying that we have allowed our liberals to only be speaking up for us as long as it doesn't cost them anything. And we see that today. As long as it doesn't pushes against the status quo. So they ask for permission to be accepting of certain things, and they call themselves liberals. But that's not the kind of liberals that we're looking for, or that's not the kind of progressive or liberals or all of that. And as I always say, there have been progressive and liberal movements that have left black people, black men, black women, black children out of it. And that is not progressive. It's not liberal. So as I move on, I want to now go into he goes to the March of Washington in that same year. That same year that he did the letter from Birmingham jail, it's the same year that he did the March on Washington. 250,000 people came to the March on Washington, and he had his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Now, there that the first there was an original march on Washington, and it was canceled. A. Philip Randolph, who was a great labor leader, you might know of A. Philip Randolph. He's a great labor leader, black labor leader. He was organizing these things, and they were going to march on Washington, and then Washington acquiesced and gave them what they wanted. So then that first march on Washington was canceled. Then something else came up, and then the March on Washington that we know happened there. And it was a glorious moment of Dr. King in the spotlight, many pictures of that event going on. And whenever I used to go when I was on the East Coast and go to DC, I would always reminisce on that period where everybody was near that reflecting pool, looking at the Lincoln Memorial, and just in awe of what happened there from Dr. King. And during that same period of time, he was almost assassinated. He was almost assassinated by that from a woman who had mental health issues. She stabbed him, and he almost died. A lot of people don't know about his stabbing, and he almost died, but he didn't. It was a black woman. She had some mental health issues, and she stabbed him, and he nearly died. So he survived that and continued on with his work. And and in this, now we're in the 63s and 64. What happens in 64? In 64, we have the Voting Rights Act. I mean, sorry, the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. As I said, there were other Civil Rights Acts just not being implemented. So we have three Civil Rights Acts. And by the time we get to 64, it's saying implement them. Don't just say it. Just don't put it on paper. Implement them. We learned this when we went to Mayor Gloria and protested Mayor Gloria when he said, "Oh, a lot of these laws are already on paper." Paper. We have human beings being dragged out, killed, shot in the face, and all these kind of things. Paper is not going to save them. They need leadership. That's what we were there for leadership. And our great champions, Francis, our great champions, Blue, our great champions, Tasha Williamson, all down there putting skin in the game, especially Blue, putting skin in the game, trying to speak up for people who they say, oh, it's on paper that they're not supposed to do these things, but yet it's still happening, and they just turn a blind eye because it's on paper. That means nothing to us. So I want to thank everybody who went down there and put skin in the game, because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about skin in the game. So he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work there. He's the inspiration to the Civil Rights Act. And the following year, 1965, the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act. What is the Voting Rights Act? I want to take a pause on here. I don't know how much time I got, but sometimes I ramble. So this is the way I teach history. Sorry, this is just the way I go. So when we have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, voting rights was part of the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to end physical slavery, except for incarceration, except for those who have been punished of a crime, which means we have not abolished slavery in this country. If you have an exception in a clause, that means you didn't close that loop. So we tried here in San Diego and in the state to try to change the exception clause to the 13th Amendment. Not the 13th Amendment, not to get rid of the 13th Amendment, but to change the exception clause and ban the exception clause just to say we do not allow slavery in this country. And we tried to get that implemented, the exception clause to be banned in California, and it failed in 2025. In 2025, it failed. So there's a lot of education. We talk about how far we've come. How far have we come? So here we are with the 13th Amendment, the ending of physical slavery, the 14th Amendment, citizenship, birthright citizenship. Why are we dealing with this under this administration? When we're talking about birthright citizenship, people of African descent bled and died for these amendments. So people of African descent will be damned if we're going to let you throw away that when our ancestors have died for that. And many people have died for it. I'm talking about white ancestors, and all kinds of people have died for that. But when I talk about black ancestors for these three amendments, when the Emancipation Proclamation happened in the middle of the Civil War, that's when it became about black people. Before the Emancipation Proclamation, in the middle of the Civil War, it was just about preserving the Union, preserving white powers, the Southern white power and the Northern white power. They didn't care about black people. But then it was a strategic move to make the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. The Civil War was already going on from 1861. And it was ended in 1865. So right here in the middle, 1863, they make the Emancipation Proclamation, and 180,000 black people join the Civil War. Now they can join, they can fight, they can liberate their families, get their mothers and their grandparents, the people they had to leave behind, out of slavery. So we will stand with our Latinx brothers and sisters for their birthright citizenship and for the idea and the concept that no people are illegal on stolen lands, because our indigenous brothers and sisters, and I should mention that we are standing on Kumeyaay lands and Payakumweechum lands of San Diego County, the original inhabitants who we share this land with, and we are their guests. So this home of ours is the home of the indigenous people, the Kumeyaay and the Payakumweechum, and we stand with them as well. So this whole concept turns together and pulls together the concept of freedom and liberty for people, no matter what your background is. So the 14th Amendment is birthright citizenship, because African people of African descent had no citizenship before that. Who told us that? The Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision said black people don't have any rights that a white man is honored to, bound to honor. And that was about citizenship and freedom. So we were already told by the Supreme Court that we don't have citizenship. We're not qualified for citizenship. So here comes the 14th Amendment, and we should all stand for the 14th Amendment because of what the 14th Amendment costs us. Now, we're going to the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment in 1870s. So now we're talking the 1860s. The Civil War was ended in 1865. The 13th Amendment, 1865. 14th Amendment, 1867. And the 15th Amendment in 1869, 1870. These are the 1860s. And we're talking about this now. We're reminiscent on the 1960s, 100 years. And that's how I started to talk about this 100-year delay on implementing these rules. So, and they're being challenged today in 2026. So, the 15th Amendment, it gave the franchise the right to vote to black males only. Black males only. It would not include our sisters, our women, all women. When I say sisters, our sisters in until the 19th Amendment in 1920s. So the black male franchise. So what happens in 1870s? And here's something very interesting, a little nuance that you might not know, is that although the federal allowance of women to vote in the 1920s started on a federal level, on state levels, they started allowing women to vote. Why? Because in 1870s, in 1870, 1869, 1870, they had a complex I call the I'll be damned complex. They said, I'll be damned if black men can vote and my white daughter can't vote, my white mother and my white wife can't vote. I'll be damned, so I'm gonna allow white women to vote. What states were these? Wyoming in 1870, Utah in 1870. These states were the first states to, they were at the time, they were colonies, but they allowed in their constitution for women to vote. And when you look at the discussions on bringing women to vote, it was a I'll be damned statement. So even in this Civil War amendment, in the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote, it inspired the role of women's rights to vote. Black men were not keeping women from voting. So the women who were mad that black men were voting and white women weren't, you needed to be mad at your brother, your father who voted for that, your uncle who voted for that, not black men. So there was a separation in the women's suffragette movement on the racist suffragettes, the suffragettes for the right to vote for women, and there was a non-racist part of it. So they separated and they did their thing. So in 1870s, we find the first opening of the franchise to non-whites. You start seeing that come out, and I must admit and say that our indigenous brothers and sisters were still at a disadvantage because the country said that they had to lose their tribal affiliation if they want to vote. In other words, you have to become this kind of American. You can't be a Native American. You can't be a original American. You can't be a First Peoples. You have to relinquish your tribal affiliation, and you know how that went over, right? You know what how that went over with our indigenous proud brothers and sisters. They were like, we're not having that. So it took another several years for indigenous. They had to make another amendment to give the indigenous brothers and sisters the right to vote because they had to get rid of that foolish, bigoted idea. So here we are in the 1870s, all the way up to the 1960s. We're still fighting for the right to vote. Why is this? Because here's another interesting thing that happened in the 1870s. I said this stuff started the Reconstruction era, and black people are getting the right to vote. Black men are getting the right to vote, citizenship, and all these things that come with citizenship. And the federal government said black males can vote. You can't do anything about it. They said, okay, well, you've heard states' rights before, right? Of the conservatives, they say states' rights. The conservatives were saying states' rights back then. They said, so here's what we're going to do. The federal government says you can vote. So as a state, though, we're going to say to vote, you have to be able to read and write. You have to be able to pay to vote and afford to vote, basically, and you have to own property. So black people just came out of slavery. What are you talking about? We have to be able to read and write. We have to be able to pay. And it was hard for people to get income back then. And you had to own property. So it wiped out the majority of black people from the franchise. This is called disenfranchisement. So they disenfranchised majority of black people, but there was an unintended consequence. Most white people couldn't read and write at that time. We're talking the 1870s, in the poor rural areas. They couldn't read and write. They couldn't pay. They couldn't afford to pay to vote, and they didn't own property either. They were living on somebody else's land and they were renting. So this put them in a conundrum. And what happened was a stroke of evil genius. A stroke of evil genius. They came up with a plan. They said, how can we do this? Our intention was to harm black people specifically. We want to harm black people, take them out of the franchise. But we didn't intend to take our white brothers and sisters out of franchise. What can we do? What can we do? So they said, we come up with what's called the grandfather clause. What is the grandfather clause? The grandfather clause says if your grandfather could have ever voted, then you can vote. Those three things are waived for you. You don't have to pay, you don't have to be able to read or write, and you don't have to own property if your grandfather was eligible to vote. What does this do? It effectively keeps black people out whose grandfathers were enslaved and brings back all the white people whose grandfathers were eligible to vote. A stroke of evil genius. And I always liken this stroke of evil genius to the reason why we still have um, welfare, and welfare hasn't been taken away. Because, in my opinion, this is just Brother Yusef talking. If they could figure out a way to get black and brown people off of welfare without impacting white people on welfare, they would have done it. They haven't figured it out yet. So that's why it's still here. They want welfare reform, but they don't want to hurt white people. And this is not an anti-white rant. I'm talking about history and what we learn from history and what people are doing. So if they could figure out a way, because if you look up the raw number of how many black people are on welfare, it is far less than the number of white people who are on welfare. So if you take welfare off, you impact more white people. The people who are against blacks, they will use the percentage, a higher percentage of black people versus a lower percentage of white people. If you take that percentage, plug it into the number of white people and get the raw number, if you wiped out all black people off of welfare, we would still have a welfare crisis in this country. So they haven't figured that out. They don't have the evil genius of the voting rights that they did when they did it in 1870. So this ushers in black codes, Jim Crow, and all of those things, and that was the redemption era that destroyed Reconstruction. And we were living in that all the way up into segregation and all the way into Martin Luther King. And this is why we had to have a Martin Luther King and all those other great figures of the time. But I don't have time to talk about those other great figures. We're focusing on Martin Luther King Jr. So, like I said, he did the he gets Nobel Prize, and then after that he does the march Selma to Montgomery, and there's a movie out, Selma to Montgomery, and I advise all of you to look at it and get some inspiration from what they did and what they had to do for the betterment of all peoples. And when we talk about the African American community, we're also talking about his allies who were white, who were Jewish, who were Asian, who were Latino, who were women, who were all fighting for this because they saw the justice in it. He wasn't alone. He got a lot of support from a lot of people. But even in his time, the majority of the country was not supporting him. This is the romanticism we have about Dr. King, that he was the beloved guy, and 80% of the world was like, this is, or the country was like, this is wrong. We got to change this. The country was forced to make the changes because they were embarrassed to the rest of the world that they have to have a civil rights act to protect their own citizens. And we need a voting rights act to protect their own citizens. When we're asking for the vote for people in Germany and Russia, we're asking for the vote in Vietnam, and black people can't vote in this country. So these implementations of these acts in the 60s were by the oppression was by design, and they had to be undone. So then Dr. King, continuing on, he comes up with another plan, which is another program called the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign was designed to attack the three evils, and it's one of the names of this program here. And we're talking about those: the poverty, we're talking about the capitalism, and we're talking about the militarism. So we're talking. He came up with these three evils of society that are impacting not only our society but societies around the world. So the first one, poverty. He understands that people the situation of poverty is man-made. We don't have to be impoverished. People, just like here in San Diego County, I always try to bring it home so we all know what we're talking about. In San Diego, the homelessness crisis is man-made. People don't have to be homeless. The reason why they're homeless is because we don't have homes, and not affordable homes. So as a county, as we're making these luxury hotels, it doesn't benefit the people who are living on the street because they couldn't afford it anyway. I can't afford it, and I'm not living on the street yet. And all of us are one paycheck, one catastrophic incident in our family from being homeless ourselves. So none of us are safe. We're one catastrophic incident. And what I mean by that is a car accident or a deep medical issue with one of your family members or something like this. This is where we all are. We're sitting on this precipice. So the only way to help that is affordable housing, but we choose to build luxury housing for the wealthy. So this poverty is man-made because we could make other choices. We could increase the minimum wage to where it should be this year. We did increase the minimum wage, but still, when we increased the minimum wage to $20 an hour, that's still 1970s minimum wage. We want to increase it to what it should be. I'm not going to give you a number, but we should increase it to what it should be so people can have one job and protect their family and still have quality time with their families. So he's talking about this poverty that is man-made. And when you look at the poverty, it's mostly includes black and brown people in this nation, and also the impoverishment of our reservation areas where they're impoverished. This is the bulk of the group that makes up the poverty level, especially in the 60s. So he's talking about poverty, and he's also talking about materialism. And materialism we can talk about as capitalism, where people are interested in goods, people are interested in profit, and not other people. So at the expense of people, we get profits. So therefore, we go back to the luxury hotel versus affordable hotels. What are they saying? They prefer profit over people. People need places to live that's affordable. So this he talked about the greed and the avarice of wealthy people in this country built on this type of capitalism, parasitic capitalism, that it bleeds off the blood of the poor and it enriches the wealthy. And then he talked about militarism, and I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on this militarism thing. Now, you may think military when you say militarism, but I want to make sure you understand that this includes the police department, the sheriff's department, ICE agents, DHS, all of those guys are militaries. They're the civil, we have civil military, which is the police department, and we have national and international military, which is our military. Like I said, I served in the Navy. We have the Marine Corps, the Army, the Coast Guard, and so on. Now we even have the Space Force, which is whatever. So we have these other branches of the military, but the black community and the brown communities are militarized. This is what in 1966 brought up the Black Panther movement, started in Oakland, California by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. They started the Black Panther movement because black communities were being policed and militarized, and people were being killed on the street for no reasons. And then we have our brothers and sisters from the Brown Berets. We're doing the same thing. They were inspired by the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party was inspired by Malcolm X. And they just wanted to use a more militant view on standing for black people, which actually worked. So we still exist today. We still have the feeding programs or food serving programs and things like that. We still do a lot of the things that we do back then. So in 1966, this happens because of the militarized communities that we had to live in under our police statement. So some people make a mistake. I know where they're going with this, but it's really a misstatement when you say that the policing of black community is caused by Israel. I just want to make sure we tweak that because over policing of black communities existed before there was an Israel in 1948. So please don't say this because this takes away the struggle and the pressure of black people from 1860s up until now. 1840s to 1948. So we cannot say that black people's experience is based on what's going on in Palestine. Please don't say that. Please tweak your conversation to another tweak. And here's a suggestion I would give that uh, our law enforcement being trained by IDF in Israel by a militarized zone is not conducive to policing civil communities. It's teaching them tactics that are used in a military zone, and we're policing civilians with it. So to stop that exchange of military police to Israel was something that we had to do because it's not the proper place. It's like it would be like sending the police to train in Vietnam, you know what I mean, and then bringing them back to police our communities. We could see the problem it has there, and that's the problem we have. So I just wanted to make that tweet. So in 1966, the Black Panther Party, they finally got tired of it. And there were other groups before the Black Panther Party that were doing it. There was a group of bishops and people say, religious people are just sitting back waiting for the kingdom to come and they're not helping. There was a group of bishops that used to patrol black communities and with armed with their rifles. So, it just came to a head in 1966 where we have the Black Panther Party, which still exists today. So this militarization of our community is that, and we're seeing a heightened version of that when we have ICE and National Guards sent to liberal states. We've had them in LA. We have them in what we currently that takes the news air right now, Minnesota, where George Floyd was killed and where Ms. Good was killed, and we have Mr. Porter who was killed, and all these kinds of violations of civil rights by law enforcement. This stuff is still continuing, and it's ramping up in the name of the border. It is a racial profiling um, um, attack on our communities. And this reminisces back. I always go back to the 1800s because we're doing the same thing. In 1850, when they did the Fugitive Slave Act, and what did they do? Law enforcement and people who were deputized to do this thing, the ICE of that time, they were looking for black people by the color of their skin, of course, looking for black people at church, at work, in the community, rounding them up and taking them to the southern border. Which southern border am I talking about? The Mason-Dixon line that separates the northern states from the southern states. They were taking them to the southern border back into slave territories so they can be oppressed over there. This is not different than the ICE patrols going looking for people of brown complexion speaking Spanish and people who appear to be Latino and rounding them up and sending them to some to the southern border, let's say Mexico or wherever they're sending them, and not all Latinos are Mexican. So what are you doing? They're not doing anything because it doesn't make sense, and it is an inhumane attack on our brothers and sisters. And we will stand with those brothers and sisters and make sure they get due process and that they get some fairness in this attack. Um, I had an idea that I bring up. I think I bring up this idea every year. I just talk about it, but somebody needs to do something about it. I have this idea. Maybe it's me, but that in the 1930s, we had what's called the Mexican Repatriation Act. What is this? They looked at the census, and everyone with a Latino last name in many states, they rounded them up and kicked them out into Mexico, whether they were Mexican or not. And some states, some averages from 500,000 to 1 million Americans were caught up in that, and they were sent over there. And our country had to apologize for the Mexican Repatriation Act. A lot of them were Americans. So what am I saying here? I'm saying, how do we know a lot of our people who are coming across are not descendants of people who were wrong, constitutionally wrong, by that Repatriation Act? So we should have an easier route for them to repatriate back to the United States because of what happened to their parents. It's just an idea, a suggestion, something to bounce around in the head, and maybe somebody here will take it up and work on it. I don't think that I, as African American, should be like the lead point on that, but I just want to throw it out there. So, um, now we're coming to the end of our story where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, and he's assassinated based on his change. At first, he was just interested in what was going on with Black people, the civil rights in this nation, but now he's talking about militarism and he's critiquing Vietnam. Which they say, okay, that's not Black business. This is what they're saying. He's critiquing endless wars all over the place for the sake of greed. He's critiquing how South Africa is dealing with Black people there. He is critiquing how um, Israel has had the occupied territories. He said himself that he believes they should give back those occupied territories. So he's tweaking on things, his argument on things that are state issues. And they said, wait, you're going too far. And his assassination was orchestrated. Now they may have closed the mouth of Dr. Martin Luther King, but I tell you all here today that you are Dr. Martin Luther King, him and her. You are Martin Luther King Jr. You are yourselves an inspiration of Dr. Martin Luther King, and he expects me to stand up and to march and to change and make legislative moves, just like he did to move that needle forward. So we are not in a place where we're post Dr. King, we're post racism, we're post bigotry. We are not. It has just been exacerbated. It has been hidden, and those people who were in the cracks and crevices, they have come out under this second iteration of this administration, and they're more emboldened to do what they're doing. And they're unfortunately there are friends, there are family members, there are co-workers. So it shows you how far it was living beneath the surface, and it was right next to you at the same time. So I want to say a blessed Dr. Martin Luther King Remembrance Day and the civil rights struggle that we've been through. I know I've probably given you more than you came to get, but it's just my style, and I am here for you. Thank you for coming to Activist San Diego's community meeting, and thank you for KNSJ, the People's Radio, that puts out great information like this, and that KNSJ should be supported by all of us. Spread the word about Activist San Diego and KNSJ, and make sure that we are putting our energy and our efforts into the right organizations that are standing up for the people. All power to the people. And I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful Francis.
All power to the people. I'm going to ask you to stay right where you're at,
Oh
Yusuf,
yeah.
everyone else, though, because, well, first, I think on behalf of everyone, I want to give you a huge round of applause. We've been having a really good number of folks listening on the Instagram live stream, as well as a good number of people here in the Zoom room, and have seen a lot of hearts and claps and whatnot. So, first, I want to just let everyone know you heard about the movie MLK FBI, and um, one thing we realized is that we can't really, project it through Zoom to everyone. So we are at encouraging everyone to rent it on your own. If you go to mlkfbi.com, you can actually see a whole bunch of different websites where it's available. Apple TV, Spectrum, Xfinity, or whatnot. Or you can buy it through YouTube, rent it, or buy it. I so far have watched the first half of the movie, and I want to say it is it was incredibly fascinating. There's so much footage that was released. The filmmaker Sam Pollard is a brilliant filmmaker, and there was many things that I started kind of was hitting me while I was watching the movie, and then to listen to Yusuf speak some questions that I have. Actually, I'm going to start with one. I'm going to give myself a facilitator one question. I'm going to let everyone else know that they can go ahead and put their questions in the chat, either on the Zoom room. If you're watching on the live stream down here, you're welcome to also put your questions for Yusuf in the chat. Now, something, and I'm going to try not give spoilers away from the movie, but um, uh, Dr. King was questioned by the press um, about communism, and in the and he had associates that were communists, and this was a something that I guess freaked J. Edgar Hoover out a lot, or he was able to use, they vilified communism as a way to vilify all, make everything sound bad. And I'm curious if you can tell us, oh, and the quote, Dr. King, when he was asked, said, I'm actually shocked that the black man has not gone to communism in droves from the way that they have been treated in this nation. And I'm curious if you have any information to share about Dr. King's take on communism, and just maybe right now, if you can speak to, how the leftists are attacked as being somehow that capitalism is American, and if you're anti-capitalist, you're anti-American. If you could speak to that, and then I'll gather questions to ask from the audience as well.
Thank you so much for that question. And actually, I love answering that question. Um, the Red Scare that we've had in this country against communism is really, as I said before, a battle between white powers. It has nothing to do with people of color, really. It is communism is the European version of communism. Capitalism is the European version of capitalism, and even socialism is the European version of socialism. So this is really a battle between white powers. So we have where we call ourselves a democracy in this capitalist situation, but what King is saying, we don't benefit from a democracy here. So he's surprised that they haven't gone into communism in droves because we don't benefit from capitalism or democracy here. We don't enjoy democracy. So why wouldn't we? So he's surprised about that. But the African American is a loyal American. So a lot of times we will put up with and try to change the system from within because a lot of us feel that we have created, and we are correct. We have created the wealth of this country, and I'll be damned if I'm going to leave it and let somebody else prosper off the wealth. The cotton industry of this nation fed the entire planet. Please understand this, that the cotton industry on the back of black people, all textiles, clothing, textiles, all clothing was, they preferred U.S. cotton And that's why the country got so wealthy is because the entire planet. India made cotton. It wasn't as good as U.S. cotton. China, Egypt made cotton, Egyptian cotton. It wasn't as good as U.S. cotton. It had a different blend, a different a strand. So the whole planet bought cotton from this country where black people weren't paid for that work and in wealth and enriching this country. So then we're going to just get up and leave and go to Liberia. Liberia was the resettlement country that they were wanting to send free black people to from the US. So that's how we get Liberia. Liberia is a resettlement country that now it's its own country, but it's a resettlement country. Their idea to get rid of black people after they freed us from slavery. They didn't want us around anymore. They like, you could be free, but we don't want you to be our neighbor. So some people took them up on that, and others like us that are still here didn't because of that same idea. So we're loyal in that sense that we've helped create this wealth of this nation on this stolen land, and we see where democracy has not benefited us in this country. So when people came back from Vietnam, they would be killed just for wearing the cloth of the nation, the uniform. A black man was wearing his uniform after he came back from war. And because he was in his uniform, he was going to eat and everything and going around. They held him down. And sorry for the graphics here, but they dug out his eyeballs. Look that up. A black man was held down in uniform and they pushed out his eyeballs because he was in the uniform of the country. So he's saying, I'm surprised. All the people who are being lynched, their houses are being bombed in democracy. Their homes are being bombed. They're being murdered by law enforcement. They're not being cared by the country and the government. He's surprised that we haven't all gone that way and support that way. But as I said before, the people of African descent are loyal to a fault in some cases, as when you look at us as a whole. But I don't find that black communists or black socialists are anti-American because we're talking about two versions that are European in their function. Europe did not create communism, nor did it create socialism, nor did it create capitalism. But their versions of it has perverted the planet. So when we have leaders like Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, and he's bringing his own version. He's taking a little bit from communism, a little bit from socialism, a little bit from capitalism, and building a economy that works for black people. For that, he was targeted. For that, the U.S. Supported people in his removal and his execution. And the same thing in Cuba, where went to socialism first. America tried to punish them for being socialist, and that pushed them into a communism to be protected by the larger communist countries. But like I said, it's a struggle between white countries, white powers, the hegemonies that we are all. If we don't fall in line, you are jailed, you're executed, you're removed, you're called these foul words. And I tell them that that's between you and your other hegemony brothers. We have to do whatever's good for the majority of the people. And capitalism in its parasitic form is European form. Its parasitic form is harming the common person.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. Um, Folks, do please go. This is your opportunity to ask Yusuf any questions, so please don't be shy. I have more questions, so I will keep going for now. Um, Nonviolence. You mentioned Malcolm X. Um, you mentioned folks carrying weapons. Um, Dr. King talks about nonviolence and how violence never leads to a positive outcome. Violence just creates, destroys everyone in the end. Curious if you could just share some thoughts about, um, I think nowadays there is a real, maybe people are questioning how one can remain committed to nonviolence when they're seeing the state violence
Mhm,
acted around us. And
mhm.
yeah, just your thoughts on that in this time.
Sure. Dr. King, he used his Christian theology to the turn the other cheek method, a nonviolence approach to violence. And as many people know here already, I was born and raised Muslim, like Malcolm X, and we are self-defensive people. So the nonviolence is not my approach when you are faced with violence, but at the same time, it is the stronger path, and with no question it is the stronger path to have. So I do credit him that to take that approach. Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam and other people, they were like, no, that's the wrong approach because you're just getting yourself hurt. He stayed the course on that. Now, here's the problem in 1960s on taking the because after Dr. King was assassinated, all the major cities started to burn. It was burnings, of the cities. LA and many other people, they started to burn this a reaction of the black community to the white structure that took away this great man. So the problem is at the end, black people, if we armed ourselves against the nation, in the end, especially at that time, we would lose in the end. So it's not strategic. It's something that can get some temporary results, but in the end it will fail because we're a militarized country and we would start wiping out black communities and there would be a lot of black mothers without sons and daughters, and husbands and husbands without wives. So it was a strategy that says that we are not capable of of a self-defensive posture. Now, that idea was not the same when it came to the Civil War. We fought, right? We picked up our arms, went down to the South, we fought, we killed because we had the ability to make an impact, a real impact. So the you have to look at the outcome 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road, and more, 20 years down the road. And a lot of people, countries, they look at a 50 and 100-year process. And that process of violence is not one that is sustainable in this country for African Americans. Now, if you look at what happened in black majority countries like South Africa and stuff, that's a black majority country, so it's different. When you look at the revolution in Haiti, Haiti is a black majority country. When they threw off the French, that's different scenario. We and African Americans are 20% of the U.S., and if 20% went to war with 80%, we can already do the math. So when John Brown tried to do his insurrection, he tried to cause the insurrection. He failed because black people could see that this is not sustainable. There's no way. And John Brown asked Frederick Douglass to join him in this. Frederick Douglass, like, man, you're crazy. Does that mean he was nonviolent because he said he didn't want to go and start raiding on Harper's Ferry and all that? It didn't, because he was supportive of black people fighting in the Civil War. So it's about strategy. And Malcolm X, who didn't like that, eventually came to the side of Dr. King before Malcolm X was killed. He was killed before Dr. King, but he started changing his views when he was leaving the Nation of Islam, and he wanted to make uh, political changes like Dr. King, and he went to one of his talks at I think it was at one of the state capitals, or maybe the U.S. Capitol, and he was waiting for him. And when he came out, he congratulated him on the work that he's done. He would have never done that before. He was calling him all kinds of names and stuff like that. But then he turned and changed and said he's going to use a different tactic. And he probably computed and did the math himself. I'm not saying that black people shouldn't take up for themselves at all. I think black people should protect themselves to the fullest extent of the law. Do not allow people to harm you and harm your family and harm your children. But as a strategy, as a black nation strategy, it was one that is fraught with loss in the ultimate end.
Thank you, thank you. I um I wonder, I know last year, and I'll encourage everyone watching now to go back and watch our January community summit, which is on our Activist San Diego YouTube. I'm pretty sure. I need to double check. Um, Actually, that one, I don't know. We had some video challenges I'm remembering. And I may need to get an audio version released. But anyway, last year we centered our conversation on Palestine and on what Dr. King had to say about Palestine, because we know that there are folks who kind of cherry pick certain phrases
Mm.
from the research that I did, and I'm sure you know much more. He was under a lot of pressure, as many people. We know the Zionist project has been very concerted in their efforts for a long time now, and put a lot of pressure on him. One thing I want to mention publicly that is just really ghastly is that there are commercials being aired. Not sure necessarily who, there's no one credited for the commercials. I saw them on Paramount Plus while watching RuPaul's Drag Race, which was wild. And these commercials, there's two different ones. And in these commercials, they basically create this weird mythology that Israel has been throughout the entire last 2 years been delivering food aid into Gaza. They say they've given food aid as 3,000 calories per person per day for the last couple years, and they basically say that all of the images that we have seen with our very eyes of children in rubble and people with lost limbs and in hospitals, and the reports we've been hearing from doctors, the reports we've been hearing from everyone, they've said that is a complete lie, and we all have to think for ourselves and make sure we don't believe these lies. And these are
Mm.
these commercials that they're airing, and it is sickening. It is entirely sickening. So we're also in a time, obviously, I really appreciate how you talked about television and how that changed and how watching the war in Vietnam shifted things. So could you just share a little bit about, touch on Palestine, and then we'll go to Lucilla's question after that?
Yeah, and I'm gonna tie it into the topic here. I haven't seen any of those commercials. Um, we should know that propaganda is propaganda. You know, you have propaganda on both sides, and when a person or any country, we're talking about a state. We're not talking about the Jewish religion. We're not talking about the Jewish people. We're talking about a state, and all states stink. I'll say it again. All states stink. The United States of America stinks. The French government stinks. Spain, all of them, Russia, Germany, and Israel, the state of Israel stinks. So why do they stink? Because they oppress the most vulnerable people more than they oppress anybody. Wars against the population is the most. It's an international crime that we see, and people will take that crime and try to redress it. And we've done it too as the United States when it came to Vietnam. We try to do that. So history is just repeating itself. You know, we try to cover up our crimes and say that you are not seeing what you're seeing. And the people who have lived through that and have multiple generations of their families wiped out, you're not seeing what you're seeing. What you're actually seeing, what they will say, what you're actually seeing is the oppression of the Israelis, which is wrong, the massacre of Israelis, which is wrong, and the indiscriminate killing of Israelis, which is wrong. But if that's wrong, and it is 10 times wrong from the volume of number of people who have the same things done in Palestine as a retaliatory issue. Now, I'm not saying that to say this as an anti-Israel. I'm tying this to Martin Luther King because Martin Luther King is against militarism. He is against the oppression of the poor and the innocent, and he said so himself. Now, he didn't have a great long dialogue about Israel and Palestine, although he did mention, we have to be fully transparent. He did mention that Israel has a right to exist and it is a beacon of democracy, but he didn't live past 68. You know what I mean? He didn't live past that to see what's going on. And in the 1967 war, he complained about what was happening to the poor Palestinians. So, especially the innocent Palestinians. And I complain about what's going on to the innocent Palestinians, just like I complain what's going on to the innocent Israelis. These are human beings and they pay the highest cost, and they're not the people in charge. The people who are going to suffer from the our current administration are the families of people of Latinx descent. They're going to suffer, but not anybody in his cabinet, not anybody sitting in his seat, not anybody on the governor's level or anything like that. They're not going to suffer. The people suffer. And when you go to South Africa, when you go to Sudan, when you go to Yemen, when you go to all these places, South and Central America, when you go to these places, and you'll find that the same mirror thing is going on that's going on in Palestine. But what they're telling us is what's going on in Palestine is not real. And everything else you see that is exactly that same situation is real. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that was no pun when I said is real. I meant to say it is actual. Okay.
Yeah, gotcha. We now have a question. I'm going to pin one of our dear friends here. Um, Nurse Brenda Miller, I'm going to ask you to unmute and
Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, I'm not sure why my video. Can you see me?
we can't see you. We
I
can just
can't
see a
see
blue
me.
screen.
I can't see me either. And every now and then I have trouble with my video. It does this, and I don't know why, but it corrects itself within time too. Um, Yusef, I could listen to you all night. You've
Thank
you're a walking wealth of knowledge, and you took me back down memory lane. I was a young girl, probably, a little younger than you, or a little older than you, I'm sorry, when we were watching, when Martin Luther King, once he died, and in the 70s, they were replaying, the injustice that was happening down there in the South with people being sprayed with water hose and beaten and dogs sicked on them. They used to vividly show all that, and it still is imprinted in my mind. Um, but one thing that I was asking, and it has always been in the back of my mind, and maybe this is a wonderful time to really find out um, about how Martin Luther King escaped all the horrible things Hoover was doing to him. And one thing was that he accused him of, adultery.
you.
But yet he was able to continue to be a strong influence in the movement. What's your knowledge about how he was able to keep going?
Well, Dr. King had a bigger vision for all Black people and not just himself. And when he gave his final speech, when he said that I will not make it there with you, but he see us as a people, not on the back of him himself, not from the good that he's done, but for all of us as a collective that we're going to move to the promised land. So when they try to destroy him, like they've always done, the silence of his friends, the words of his enemies, like he already said, it's not the words of your enemies because they're going to say horrible things about you. They called him a communist that we were talking about earlier when we were in the communist scare. That really makes people hate you that you're a communist. They try to call him an adulterer. They try to call him a rapist and all these kind of things. And all of these words came out against him, like they came out against Malcolm X. The Black Panther Party were sent letters of attack from other groups and saying they were saying these groups are going to attack you. You better get your guns ready and go get them first and kind of things like that. And they tried to make us attack each other. The Black Panther Party, the Brown Berets, also Black Panther Party and other gangs in places like New York and places like that. So this is the common strategy of J. Edgar Hoover in the counterintelligence program because they said in their form that they want to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. So it was racist in its intent. It said it itself. It's public document. They want to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. So they want to attack the famous Black Messiahs. Now, Malcolm X, he was like, no, my attacks are really coming from the Nation of Islam, which there was some. But when he left the country, he was still getting the same attacks. So people will call him in hotels throughout the United States saying, I'm going to kill you, calling him the N word and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. And they were using black voices. So they could be black people who are on the payroll that's still doing these things, which constantly happens even today. But they were calling him all through the country. And he thought that the Nation of Islam was following him that way. But then when he went to Egypt, when he went to other countries, he was still getting the calls. Black people don't black people can't do that. You know, it was the government, it was the FBI and CIA following him around. So back to Martin Luther King, these attempts to discredit him and to stop him from doing his work, even to ask him to commit suicide, is is part of the whole COINTELPRO program where we discredit black leaders, get black people to turn on black people, kill other black people, and sometimes, many times, we fall for it. So the claims of adultery, the claims of communism, and all those things, if any black person wanted rights, rights equals communism to white supremacy America. So, and any person with their fight for their liberty equals communism in white supremacy America. So, I don't know if I answered your question fully, but that's where I would take that those attacks on him, on his marriage vows, on his his character as a pastor and as a preacher is the counterintelligence program did that to many of the black leaders and he wasn't immune from them. So I would take everything they say with a grain of salt. And that letter that went to him saying he's a rapist and he's a fraud and he should kill himself and all these kind of things, it was alluding that he should kill himself. It's unsigned. People say, look, this is an evidence, this is an unsigned letter. It's just propaganda. So that's what I would say to that, sister.
Well, I do appreciate that, and you it brought made me think about Colin Kaepernick,
Mm.
where what he said was taken out of context, completely out of context, and how one lie just can't. It's kind of what we're living with this day and age, where one lie keeps being repeated over and over and over until the truth is distorted.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, and I will say I'm currently halfway through the documentary MLK FBI. Sam Pollard did a really interesting job piecing together a lot of old footage. I haven't gotten to the end of it yet, and so I can't say, but I think that they're really getting into some of this, um, the wiretapping, what they learned from the wiretapping. I will say, you know, seems like he was non-monogamous. And as someone who questions monogamy myself and doesn't believe it's the most natural form of existence, I think, on the vilification, luckily we're in, I think, a time where people are starting to recognize that the traditional forms of, aren't necessarily you know, the way things need to go, but it sort of flipped on me. I was thinking about Black Joy. You could say he was someone who really embraced life and embraced, perhaps physical passions and pleasures in ways that, the establishment definitely always looks at these things, and people of color have to rise to a higher standard, right? So there's this other kind of thing that we see here.
Well, I to his adultery, I would say that the adulterers who are calling him adulterous, um, like I said before, his this is an attack on Coretta Scott King as well, and that even as an adulterer, if he was an adulterer, they talk about a lot of that and they have some evidence and all this kind of stuff. Even as an adulterer, he gave us the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights of 1965. It doesn't erase those things. The Montgomery bus boycott is not going to be erased by his adultery. Neither will the sit-ins. Neither will the Poor People's Campaign or the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act or as he's doing the Poor People's Campaign, talking about housing discrimination. The Housing Discrimination Act, or the Fair Housing Act, comes in 1968 after he was already dead. But the ball started rolling. So the Prevent Housing Discrimination in 1968, that is also by him. None of that can be taken away from him if he had two girlfriends or 10. They cannot be taken away from the impact it has on all Americans, not just him, not just black people, all Americans. Fair housing, voting rights, civil rights. None of that can be taken away from that man, even if he, what you name it, So we are still honoring that man, and I think after his uh, his affairs were made public, even if this is true, right? But the affairs that they made after made public, he did repent and go back from that and continued with his life his wife
Hmm.
with his wife.
Hmm.
So that is the resilience of his wife. It was an attack on his wife and a harm on his wife. And if he did it, he shouldn't have harmed Coretta Scott King in that fashion. But that still is irrelevant to the celebration of that man. Because, like I said, if nobody is everybody, if no one is has access to redemption, a lot of our heroes have to go away.
Right. And you could almost say, almost like, unless we're perfect, we can't step up to be leaders. I think
Yes.
that would prevent a lot of leadership from happening. And Lord knows we need more leaders these days, a leaderful movement.
And
I
and
want
one more thing. Those people who talk about, because you won't find us talking about this kind of stuff about Dr. King. The people are on the conservative level of things when they talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, and they say we should throw him away because he was an adulterer. They don't talk about Thomas Jefferson and his adultery. They don't talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and their slavery. They don't talk about these people. They don't say throw them away as well. They're still on our money. They're still on our dollar bills. So it is unique how they want to hold a black messiah to a higher level, but the people they call fathers of the nations and all these kind of people, they're not the people. We shouldn't talk about that. Like, why are you talking about the bad parts? It's like, oh, we want to talk about everything. So bring to me what you say about Dr. King, fine. So I can bring to you also. We have to say about Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and all those other folks.
Well, simultaneously, they were glorifying JFK, was as an adulterer, as someone just
That's
pointed out in
right.
the chat. Like that was, he was cool for it.
Yes.
Uh, go ahead, Brenda.
Thank you very much for letting me just kind of follow up with the information that you have shared. And I've lived with and concluded he didn't destroy the man. Hoover did not destroy Martin Luther King, no matter what was said, what he did, how he he was just against Martin Luther King, but he did not stop the movement.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
true.
right.
So, um, Yusuf, throughout your conversation, you talked about how Dr. King was fighting for everyone,
Yeah.
and you talked about the indigenous movement. You talked about um, many different ethnic groups that he was fighting for, and that it was for everyone. I wonder, well, I'm not sure how much you've studied the Reverend Dr. Jesse Jackson, but I think of the Rainbow Coalition that he formed through his presidential campaign, and how that idea of a rainbow coalition that includes every color. Um, what in this time, it seems that that is where we need to go. I will say one thing that at the beginning of the documentary, uh, we hear Dr. King say, "I will never speak ill of white people," or something like that, because there are many white people who are, uh, uh, um, with us. And so I think that right now it's become easy for folks to kind of pile onto white people. And I think that there's a place for sure to have critique, and have a critical eye to white supremacy and to maybe some of the um, layers of white supremacy that have seeped out down deep. Um, how do we build at this moment, do you think? And what do you see as hopes, and where do you think our movement needs to go and how it needs to grow?
Well, when it comes to the piling on to white people, um, this is a trauma that the trauma has caused, where we look at white people as all white people is the enemy, but this is a false equivalent because trauma is trauma. Traumatize people, traumatize other people. But the problem is not white people as a DNA marker. There's no such thing as a DNA marker for racism. It is a cultural phenomena, and as it was learned, it can be unlearned. So when we have our white allies who are not enculturated into that bigotry, we need to support them. I used to tell my white allies is that I'm not impressed by white people who fight for the status quo. I'm not impressed by that. That's what they're supposed to do because they know it benefits them. What I'm impressed by are white people who could benefit from the status quo but still stand with people of color. That's impressive because it really you're already on the side. You're already on that privileged side, but you're still taking up for people who are not privileged. So I'm impressed with that. Don't tell me how many people if they're right or wrong that they don't like black people for XYZ and all that kind of stuff. I have answers for that, but that's typical for a person who is bigoted and they just want to hear information to justify their bigotry against other people. But when you have our white allies that come from that side and they take up for people, which in essence doesn't really benefit them except morally, doesn't really benefit them in the system. It doesn't benefit them in housing. It doesn't benefit them in loans. It doesn't benefit them in healthcare. But they're fighting for healthcare, housing, and all that for people who can't. So we shouldn't make the mistake of classifying or overgeneralizing white people, just like we didn't want to be overgeneralized ourselves. So it's a problem to lump all white people into one group. um but it is a earned trauma. It is earned. The white society, the Eurocentrism. The problem is white supremacy, not white individuals. It's not Europeans, it's Eurocentrism and that kind of thing. And it's also not males, but it's the toxic male identity that we have that destroys our relationships between men and women. So in all of those aspects, we look at the problem and not the people that belong to the group. Let's just look at the problem and solve the problem. Males are enculturated to this patriarchy. We're enculturated to it. We don't have to be it, but we're enculturated to it. White people in a lot of countries, they're enculturated to white supremacy, and that's all they see, then they believe it. And the reaction to white supremacy is black survival. And in black survival, we caution ourselves from white people because there was an incident, several incidents, where black people have befriended white folks at work. You can look it up in a news article online. They they befriended this black person at work, invited him to a barbecue, only to beat him up and set him on fire. So it's like, it's the antennas go up, and it's like, okay, I need protection from the illness of white supremacy. It's an illness. It's a mental illness. And you need protection against this mental illness. So it is a reaction to oppression that causes us to think that way about white people, all white people. But I would say that we are wrong in that if you are infected by that trauma.
Awesome. Um, we are coming close to um the 8 o'clock mark. At that point, I will end the live stream. We don't need to vacate the Zoom immediately, but I have been holding my phone up for about 2 hours now. Um, I we have a question that has come in through the Instagram live, so I'm going to ask that question. But one question I also well, let me ask this question and then I'll go back to that. Okay, so from give a shout out to Arthur. How do you think MLK would react to the Christian nationalist movement that has taken hold in America and the hypocrisy of their proclaimed values versus how they act, or how do you react to it?
Well, Dr. King mentioned that in his time. He said the most segregated hour in America is Sunday, which is when people go to church. It is more segregated than the rest of the country is the church. So he realized that white Christian nationalism is a problem. And even from the pulpits, you will have people preaching racism and bigotry. Now, when we talk about conservative religion, Martin Luther King was conservative religiously and socially liberal. Then you have people who are conservative religiously and conservative socially. So this is the dividing line where you would see Martin Luther King marching for people's rights, and he's Christian, and you'll have other Christians attacking Black people for integrating into their community, and they both say they're Christian. So this liberation theology that he has is based on his religious faith, based on the Bible, based on these things, and he expresses it that way. And then our conservative religious people who have blended that into conservative politics, they are looking at it from a totally different perspective. Yet they both consider themselves Christian. So please make a distinction between when we talk about religious conservatives, that when we talk about the Black church and the white church, and they've always been separated on the social political policies. They were social or liberal in the Black church. They're social conservative in the white church, and make sure that we understand the separation between the two. So he would say the same thing he said then, is that one of the problems of this country, and he probably wouldn't have used the words that we use today, but we can plug them in the same way, is that Christian nationalism in its bigotry, and its xenophobia is a problem in this nation. And when he passed, the the combination of the Christian right and the political right hadn't happened. So he passed in 60. He passed in 68. Sorry, 67. He passed when he passed. The Reagan era hadn't happened yet. So and the they started coming. It was on its way. It was developing because the Brown versus Board of Education was pulling the Christian right into the political right. It was from the Brown versus Board of Education. Some people thought it was the abortion issue, but it wasn't. It came afterwards. But Brown versus Board of Education brought the Christian right into the political right. So that happened in 54. Martin Luther King is still alive. It's developing and it's rolling, and it solidified under after Nixon. Then it really started to solidify, and it solidified under Ronald Reagan. He's the first true modern Republican, Ronald Reagan, and it encapsulated all the negative and worst parts of conservatism under his leadership. So this is what I would say to that. Make sure that we understand that movement, Christian nationalism, is a white church phenomenon mostly, and they try to bring in the Black churches as well and try to convince them on the theology part of it. But they need to be careful to make sure that they are not falling for the trap of bigotry and otherisms of people in the name of religion, which is bad religion. It is ugly religion, and it is bad religion.
Thank you. So I'm gonna plant a question that, we probably could talk for another hour on. Um, and so I'm gonna share, though, it may end up becoming our topic for next month's meeting. Um, I think right now, as we're seeing this administration um, make bold moves, bold, uh, unconstitutional moves to attack countries like Venezuela, and we'll say, I'm gonna say, I know this is complicated, and I don't, we can get into it, but say foment uh animosity towards um Iran and in Cuba. And one of the things that I think Dr. King understood, connecting the militarism with the poverty and the racism, I think it's important that we all kind of step back and, like, when people, across the political spectrum, people are talking about Maduro and saying how just across the board horrible he is, right? Now, economically, we have to remember that for, what, probably 15 years, we've had an economic sanctions on Venezuela, and we have been crippling their economy to the degree where people are struggling to the degree, and everyone's blaming Maduro, and he's needing to then this, sort of control the situation in his country, we'll say. Um, and in countries, you mentioned survival, how obviously a lot of people are working to survive, and even in this global economic system, um, we have countries feeling like there's proximity to whiteness, and there's proximity to US America, and proximity to the imperial powers, right? And the closer you are to those imperial power, the more largesse that you can, they'll come and train your military in countries like Peru, where my mother comes from. The US has done a really big, you know, great job at really embedding militarily with Peru, and I know that they've been ganging up on, say, Venezuela. And in Peru, when I was talking to Peruvians, they're actually kind of troubled by the influx of Venezuelans who tend to be darker skinned, have more poverty, and there's almost a racism against the Venezuelans in Peru. When we heard this, talking to some, like, folks, drivers or whatever, had, it's like, do you realize that in America they would be racist against you? So there's these levels of, if I'm safe and I'm close enough to the power, then it's okay. So I
Mhm.
just want to share that. I saw Martin's hand go up, but Martin, you want to go ahead and jump in with some thoughts as we're closing up, and go ahead. You just got to unmute yourself.
I would encourage people to listen to Democracy Now, a program that of Martin Luther King's speeches. One, the last speech that he gave prior to being assassinated 24 hours earlier, and the speech on Vietnam, Beyond Vietnam, it's called, from the Riverside Church, and the incredibly insights that Martin Luther King had, and the condemnation that came down as a result of this speech. But it is profound in its global insights about what this country is, and the daring morality of him to do that, in which he mentions, our support of dictators in uh, in Venezuela, stealing all the oil wealth, so decades ahead. Um, just to bring that up, that he essentially describes what imperialism is without um, actually naming that, though he's very bold in naming capitalism. Um, but, you know, we also know and understand from Martin Luther King and from our own lived experience that white supremacy is alive and well in U.S. foreign policy. And the most recent example really is there's not a lot of huge disdain for what Trump did in bombing Syria or Iran, and what he did in Venezuela, compared to, oh my God, he's attacking, going to attack a European nation's colony, and there's just a double standard that just brings out the degree to which there's still the white blind spot in our
Mhm.
foreign policy and alive and well in all aspects of America.
Thank you, Martin.
Well, to to start off with Maduro, and I don't think the question is whether Maduro was a good or bad person. The question is whether the U.S. had the right to go do what they did. And people, when we say that the U.S. should not have done what they did in Venezuela, people say, oh, well, you're supporting Maduro or whatever. Look, we're talking about international law. We're talking about what types of wars you're getting Americans in, and just at your whim for the sake of oil. And he's very clear about this, that he's doing it for the sake of oil. So you can ask for justice on the right thing without supporting that dictator that of that country. For example, Iraq. Just because they claim that they have weapons of mass destruction, and I didn't support Saddam Hussein at all, but the fact that we use that as a pretext to go in and destroy so many lives in Iraq, in what we did in Afghanistan and places like this is just the same playbook of colonization. And as to both of your points, is that when we see how he bombs Venezuela and takes their president and his wife into custody, you see that he doesn't bomb Russia for what they're doing to the people in Ukraine. That we bombed the Japanese in Pearl Harbor. I mean, because of Pearl Harbor and all these kind of things, we bombed the Japanese people with two bombs, but we didn't bomb Germany. You know what I mean? This you could. It's just clear when you see the people of color versus fellow Europeans. And I said in one of my lectures that sometimes we look at Europeans as many different groups, but actually, uh, sometimes you could see them as this good old boys club, where there's certain things they would do to people of color that they wouldn't do to other Europeans. Their kith and kin, so to speak. So we see this white supremacy and Eurocentrism play out in a way that is detrimental to people of color, and this false notion of whether they're communist or socialist or if they're even a dictator. One person's dictator is the other person's monarch. So we call the dictators that we like, they're monarchs, and the dictators that we don't like, they're dictators. So it's just a play on words and a method to lull the American support to sleep, so that we'll say Maduro is a bad guy. That's why I'm going to break the law and do what I do to his country. And you guys be okay with that because he's a bad guy. The point is, whether you support Maduro or not, and also I want to say for Venezuela, the wonderful sister that wants to take over and run the country, she's been trying to run it. She won the Nobel Peace Prize to to allow her to denigrate herself so bad. This is how desperate she is to to give Trump her Nobel Peace Prize just to get some support from this dictator in the United States. And it causes her to do something so embarrassing, so incredibly sad, that she gave him the medal because he's so petty and he's so childish, and she wants to help her people. She had to denigrate herself to the state of giving him that prize. It brings a tear to my eye whenever I see the picture that she had to do that just for the sake of her people. And you see him with this big ugly grin to say, "Yeah, I got the Peace Prize." You don't have the Peace Prize. You have a medal. You don't have the Peace Prize. It's untransferable. So sorry for going on that rant. But anyway, I stand with the people of Greenland and their resolve to stand and say we will not be bullied, just like our people in Canada said we will not be bullied, just like our people in Mexico said we will not be bullied, and our people all around the world to say they will not be bullied, and are one of our champions of this time where we look at Ukraine, where the president of Ukraine says he will not be bullied either. So as we look around the world, we see people standing up to a dictator, and now we have an administration that is a full-fledged dictator and global pariah by attacking other countries and putting everybody unease as he's threatening all around the world. So it's a really embarrassing second iteration of an embarrassing time in our nation.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. I it's we have people entering, and I think as we advertised at 8 o'clock that we would do another screening of MLK FBI. But as I'll mention again, we're going to be inviting everyone to rent it themselves to watch it. And I do want to say that anyone who cannot afford the $3.99 to rent it, please DM Activist San Diego or email us at Activist San Diego, and we will find the resources to get it so you can rent it. Um, and I want to um yes, end our program officially with a huge round of applause for Brother Yusuf Miller, for sharing his knowledge and experience and wisdom and just his heart with us. We are so grateful to have you here at Activist San Diego, in San Diego, and just on this planet. And it's an honor to be um, working alongside you. I want to invite everyone back next. Um, the third Monday of each month is when Activist San Diego holds our community summit. February, if someone could tell, write in the chat what the date, the third Monday in February is for me, that would be great. I want to give just a couple of announcements. I can remove your pin.
1 second before you do the announcements, I want to
Yep.
thank Francis for the Martin Luther King Day March. When we were marching in that, she had a bullhorn and the quotes of Martin Luther King, and she recited those quotes over and over for the whole march. You could tell her voice was getting all hoarse and was getting raspy, and she kept going, and she was getting all these applause. A stellar job you did at the MLK Day March, Francis, and thank you for being taking that type of leadership. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. And I'm gonna leave you up pinned up because that keeps the frame nice for me. So I want to thank you for also walking and all those who did join. We had a couple students from SDSU, some freshmen who had their first organizing experience, thanks to Professor Adam Aaron, who gave him extra credit to not just show up, but to actually um, to experience the praxis of the work, the doing of the work, and it was really, really awesome.